Hello! Today we are wrapping up my reading for the month of July, and it was a really fun reading month. I had the Roberts Readathon going on, which a lot of you guys participated in, and that was really fun to see people trying Nora Roberts for the first time, or maybe trying a different kind of Nora Roberts that they hadn't tried before, since she writes a lot of different subgenres. So yeah, that was really fun, and I got a few things off of my TBR that I was working on in terms of like challenges or arcs, etc. So yeah, I feel like it was a pretty solid, productive, and high-rated reading month all around. So we will get into that. We will talk about my stats and then my hits, my surprises and my disappointments. And then I also have some housekeeping and some updates about a giveaway. So I will talk about that at the very end for those of you who are interested. So with that being said, let's start with some stats. Okay, for the month of July, I read 19 books, 15 of which I owned, 4 of which I did not own. I read a total of 6,527 pages for an average book length of 343 pages, which is actually a good deal higher than my average page count, and that is because I read a couple of chunky big boys that we will talk about. The average age of book I read was 19 years old, which is great, and the average amount of time a book had been on my TBR was 17 months. I paid for 36.8% of the books I read for an average cost of $2.06 per book. The two highest places where I got books from were Amazon, which makes sense because I read several ebooks this month, and publishers, because I did read a number of arcs or things that were sent to me. Genre mix wise, pretty typical combo of genres. The two highest that I read were contemporary romance and mystery, which makes sense given that I was doing a lot of Nora Roberts reading, but also arc reading. Those are popular genres for me to read front list for. And then I did read 4 fantasies and then a smattering of nonfiction, general fiction, memoir, etc., etc. Really solid average rating this month of 3.6 stars, so that's definitely higher than normal. And you can see that the distribution of ratings definitely skewed towards the upper end, so not surprising that the average rating was higher because overall I was liking what I was reading this month. And then in terms of challenges I addressed or arcs that I was reading, etc., that I will not talk about in a different section. Arc-wise, I did read How to Kill Your Best Friend by Lexi Elliott and Battle Royal by Lucy Parker, and I talked about those in my mid-month check-in, so I'll just point you back there. But both of those were 4-star reads for me. I really enjoyed both of them. And then in terms of reading Roberts things that I'm not going to talk about in a different section, I did read Search for Love, which is in this little bind-up of Pride and Passion, which was a contemporary at the time, coming up on a historical, because 40 years is usually the time span for a historical. So almost historical because it's definitely from the 80s, but yeah, it was not my favorite. It was okay. It felt a little, it was just very category trope-tastic for the 80s. I think if it was written today, it would be called like, I think I said like Painting for the French Count's Pleasure or something. It was just not, I think having read now Irish Thoroughbred and one other category from the 80s from Nora Roberts recently, I can say it's not her best version of a category. I think I gave that one 2 stars. It was okay. Not the worst way I've spent time, but not great. And then I also read Vision in White by Nora Roberts, which I think I gave 4 stars to just because the hero was absolutely adorable. He's one of the most beta, chill heroes I've ever read in a Nora Roberts, so if you were looking for that, I would definitely recommend Vision in White. And it definitely has her whole like competency porn thing where everybody is really good at their job. She does a really, she communicates that in a very compelling way. It's one of her sort of like hallmarks, and this definitely had that. It's the first in a quartet of books called The Bridal Quartet, and is following 4 friends who have been friends since their childhood, and now they have a wedding business together where they each have like a different specialty. So this book was with the photographer of the group, and she definitely had some toxic mom issues, which, you know, bingo board, there you go. So she definitely qualified for that. And then I think the next book is the florist of the group, and yeah, I'm really excited to keep going in that series because I really found this one very charming. Definitely a success. And then the last one for a challenge was Heavy, which I got as a part of the Literati book club boxes that they've been sending me, and I really enjoyed this. I started this in June, I finished it up in July, and this is I think I put in my review on Goodreads that heavy is a very good title for it because it's very heavy in pretty much every sense. So like it's a lot about his experience as a fat person. So like he's got like a heavy body. He has a very heavy and very traumatizing and violent often upbringing and history. So that's like the subject matter is heavy. And then it's also an exploration of race. So like psychically this heavy load on him as a black man in America and especially a black man in the Deep South. So this is really a beautiful, I think the writing itself is really excellent. And I think that this is a very good example of memoir as a type of literary fiction. It's not fiction, it's like literary nonfiction, but it definitely has a lot of art in the way that it's told. I think this is a good example of it. And I think he's directing this story towards his mother, who I think you have to go with was abusive, but they have a really nuanced and layered relationship. Like it's not simplistic, which I very much appreciate in memoirs with abusive parents. Like for instance, Running with Scissors by Augustin Burroughs, I really hated because I'm not trying to excuse what happened to him as a child, but I think his lack of any kind of processing of where people were coming from didn't make it a very interesting book other than just like, yeah, that sucks. Like, I'm sorry. This has so much empathy for his mother and his grandmother really in a way that shows a lot of genuine insight and work that he's done to process the situations he found himself in. And I flagged this quote because I was like, oh, this is a good summary. He's talking, the prologue is him directing towards his mom and his grandmom, talking about him saying like, I want to lie about what happened, but I can't. Like, I have to be truthful about this. And he's talking to his mom about like his upbringing. She says, I don't remember hurting you as much as you remember being hurt, Kai. I'm not saying that it didn't happen. I'm just saying I don't remember everything the way that you do. And I think that's a lot of what this book is really about, and this memoir is about, is him processing that his mother doesn't really have bad intentions necessarily, but that doesn't negate the harm she did. So anyway, I thought this was very thought-provoking and a very memoir-y memoir. Like, I think if you're looking for a layered memoir that has a lot to say, is written really well, and is very thought-provoking, like, I see why this was a book club pick, because this is a very good book club pick. Like, you can go a lot of places in terms of what you think about with it. So anyway, that was something I was trying to get done for Literati Book Club. Is that it for things I'm not going to cover? Yeah, I'm going to cover all the rest of these in a different category. So with that being said, maybe let's start with our disappointment. So I only have two, neither of which I rated very low. I just think what my expectation was versus what the book was, I was just a little disappointed. So I think these are both perfectly good books, just not exactly as good as I was hoping they would be. So the first is The Mysterious Mr. Quinn by Agatha Christie. So this was a reread for me, and I have another Agatha Christie reread we'll talk about. I've been counting those in my overall book totals as opposed to like, I haven't been counting my Nalini Singh ones just because they're ones that I genuinely remember pretty much nothing about until I get into them. So I feel like they feel like new reads, and that's the whole reason why I didn't even put them in my original ranking. So anyway, side note, I have been counting those. I don't know if you guys care about the intricacies of what I do and don't count as read in a month, but if you do, there you go. So, Mysterious Mr. Quinn. I did read this collection, or at least most of this collection back in the day. I, however, did not read it in chronological order, I don't think, the first time. So I do think that that was an interesting experience, and one that I would recommend for this collection. Well, would I? I think I liked these less having read them in order, but I do think I understand the project of these short stories better having read them in order, so do with that what you will. Basically, Mr. Quinn, Mr. Harley Quinn, is this enigmatic figure in this series of Christie who is modeled after the kind of archetype of the Harlequin from essentially like Italian comedies of the bygone era. I forget when this was popular, but it's like it's a thing. And Agatha Christie was very taken with this particular archetype. He showed, like, that archetype shows up a lot, I think, in her like attempts at poetry as a young lady. And it also shows up, I think, often like references to the kind of Harlequin either pattern or archetype is not uncommon to be referred to in general in Christie. So I think it's something she really identified with or was interested in. And these are clearly stories she enjoyed writing based on what I was reading about her and her relationship to the series she had going. She really would only write them when she was in the mood to. I think for me, because Harley Quinn is ultimately kind of a figure of supernaturalness, I don't know that I ended up loving all of these stories, because the way these mysteries work is that basically he he shows up and he has Mr. Satterthwaite, who is the other protagonist of this series. He helps him see things in a way that he hadn't seen them before. So there's a lot of telling rather than showing in these short stories, because it's Mr. Satterthwaite with Harley Quinn's help reflecting on either a current mystery or often like a mystery from the past and coming to a new insight or solution about it. So I feel like it ends up being quite a passive story format often, and it doesn't have, I don't know, there's just something about this that doesn't click all the way with me. I think the supernatural element doesn't fully work for me, and I think many of these stories are very melodramatic and very many of them seem to involve suicide in some way or another, so just know that. They feel quite over the top. It's a Christie and it has her lovely writing style, and there definitely were some standout stories I felt like in this collection that I did really enjoy. There was particularly one with like a possible ghost who was like a cavalier from the Revolution days. I thought that one was particularly good. There was one with a painting of a Harlequin that I thought was really good. So there was a few standouts, but overall I felt like this was a little bit uneven, and therefore it was just like not my favorite of the Christie canon. But I'm glad to remember that now because I had totally forgotten about these short stories, so now I at least have a firm opinion about them. The other disappointment I had was My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. This is the first Stephen Graham Jones book I've read, and I think the reason I would have this as a disappointment is mostly just because I was hoping to love this, and I didn't. I think it's an interesting project. He has a very specific writing style that for the type of story he was telling didn't fully work for me. It's definitely what I would describe as literary horror, and it definitely culminates in some pretty action-packed horrificness, but it is very slow to get there, and I didn't love that piece of the kind of ride of this book. There are also these, the one thing I did really enjoy were these interspersed essays about slasher flicks, because basically I think that this is meant to mimic the structure of a slasher film where there's a lot of buildup and then there's sort of that like climactic, just like explosion of violence towards the end. I think that's what this is meant to sort of mimic, but I think as a reading experience, it wasn't necessarily my favorite. So I'm definitely intrigued to try more from him. I'm gonna have to try more from him regardless, because we have a book from him as our October book club pick in the Blades and Bodice Ripper book club. So I'm excited to try something else from him and see. It's also a much shorter book, so I'm wondering if I'll just gel with that one a little bit better. But I was just disappointed because I was hoping I was just gonna be like, ugh, loved this book, can't wait to just like rip through his backlist, and that's not really where I ended up with it. Okay, so then let's go to surprises. We'll start with the Nora Roberts section of surprises. So I had 3 I flagged as a surprise. One is Year One, which this is probably the Paranora I have liked the best, which is what we refer to her more speculative books as. This is a book that is dystopian, and it is dystopian via a plague, and it hit a little close to home, frankly, in a post-2020 world, and I wonder how I would have perceived this if I had read this prior to the coronavirus and like having some firsthand experience of like, oh no, you couldn't get a vaccine together that quickly, like we're all armchair pandemic pros at this point. So I wonder how I would have reacted to it based on that. This does have a fantastical origin of the pandemic, which helped me overlook some of what I think the shortcomings of this are. I put this as a surprise because this is the first Paranora that I have quite enjoyed. I originally gave it a 4-star, but then like as I sat with it, I think I'm more at like a 3.5. I think this is like a B+ for me, but I think every other Paranora I've ever read, I've given a 3-star to. Like it's only just been like, okay, like average, like a B basically. So this is definitely my favorite, so I was surprised about that. I had forgotten that there was a virus as like a pandemic as the inciting whatever. And I think that this also gave me an insight as to why her paranormals don't tend to work as well for me. And I think it's because she tends to have a lot of point of views, and I think she is most successful in sort of like getting you to buy in to her world and project when she just has 2 points of view, and you can really immerse yourself into those characters' voices, because there is a certain level of sort of like artifice or cheesiness to her writing that I think she just sells you on it, and it works in a lot of her other books. And I think in her Paranoras, because there's so many points of view, it's harder for you to get fully immersed in that. and to just get into the flow with it and kind of just go with her wherever she's going. So this took me a while to get into. Once I was into it, I did really enjoy it. It's very slow, and I think that this might be a good book for people who don't read a lot of speculative fiction, because I think the speculative elements are pretty light and it ends up being quite cozy the way that a lot of her books do. I would describe this as a cozy fantasy dystopia, which I just don't know that I've ever read something like that before. So for that reason, I felt like this was a surprise, but I ended up liking this one pretty well. And then Irish Thoroughbred and Summer Desserts, I had both of those as surprises, and I gave both of them 3 stars. So it's not that I loved them, but for an 80s category, both of them really just were enjoyable, I thought. This is the first book she ever wrote, and I was surprised to see how much of her voice really shone through in that first book. And yes, it definitely still has a lot of tropes of an 80s category. It's set at this horse farm in Maryland, and there's a lot of just like very domineering romantic partner stuff, and like it, but not nearly as much as most books I've read from that era. Like most books I've read from that era, the heroes are unreadable to me. Like I just hate them. And I didn't feel that way about Travis. I didn't like him, but I didn't hate him. And I think that speaks to the fact that when Nora Roberts came in, she actually was really a pioneer in toning down the heroes. Like her heroes were always a lot chiller in comparison to her contemporaries. And she also, and I guess we can then move on to, so this surprised me. It's the first book she ever wrote, how good it was and how readable it was still to modern tastes, I feel like. Summer Desserts, the other innovation, or I don't know that she was the first person to do this, but she was really the popularizer of having the alternating points of view between the hero and the heroine. And you get that in Summer Desserts, which I believe was from 1985. Part of what I really enjoyed about this, it's not that great of a book, but I did just really enjoy, part of what category romances do is that they sell specific kind of capitalist fantasies to its readers. Like that's a part, I mean, we could get into the whole literary studies side of this, but a part of what a category romance is selling to you is a wealth fantasy or a fantasy about success. And because they're really speaking to their current moment, it is a fascinating insight into what kind of a wealth or success fantasy looked like in 1985. And seeing that on page, I frankly was just very entertained and fascinated by. It was very sudsy. The hero was like not over the top really hardly at all. Like he was a little bit arrogant, but again, for a mid-80s category, I was shocked that she was allowed to have somebody be that chill. And I was surprised that we, that early on in her career, get that alternating point of view, because it was not common. Usually you only got the heroine's point of view, and part of the tension was supposed to be like the heroine doesn't really, she can't read the hero, even though you as the reader obviously can. And that's a lot of where the tension's coming from. And that's just like not the project of that book. So I was surprised by that. Anyway, I thought it was actually very readable and very like sudsy and dramatic in a way that I enjoyed. And then I would also say that Murder is Easy was a big hit for me. It's another Agatha Christie reread, but I remembered nothing about this one. This was a surprise to me because I forgot that this was a serial killer book. And yeah, I'm doing a vlog of this one, so I think I think I recorded like my full thoughts there, but I'll just say that I had totally forgotten the solution to this. I did guess it, but I didn't remember it. Does that make sense? Like maybe I mean, it's possible that the reason I guessed is that some part of my recesses of my mind dialed into it, but I don't consciously remember it. I just guessed it based on the way it was going. I did think that what made this book weaker than it otherwise would have been is the way that the solution unfolds over the last third, but I was very surprised at the kind of book this was, that it is definitely a serial killer book from Christie, and I just forgotten she had this one as that type of book. She doesn't have a lot of those, honestly, but I think that she does them pretty well, and they're very entertaining. This was hopelessly Christie in the sense of like just the vibes and the village overall milieu were poppin'. It was really wonderful. I very much enjoyed that part of it. And yeah, I think this is one that I actually really enjoyed despite being very clear-eyed about its weaknesses, which I can't really get into because that would be a spoiler. It definitely has weaknesses, but I just enjoyed it so much that I didn't care. Also, one of the biggest weaknesses is the romance, but like I'm someone who's, I think I share the sensibility with Christie of like, I like a romance even if it's not that well done. I'm not mad that it's there usually. So anyway, that one surprised me in terms of the type of book it ended up being, I guess. Okay, and then coming into the hits. So first I wanted to talk about Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb. This was a chunky book at I think almost 900 pages, but I really enjoyed this a lot. This is definitely my favorite Robin Hobb I've read so far. I think if you are someone who tried to read the Farseer trilogy and it was too slow and too character driven for you, or if you're someone who slow character driven fantasy is a little harder pitch for you, I might suggest starting with this trilogy because I do think I personally am connecting with Robin Hobb as a writer more in this multi-point of view type story. It is still pretty slow when you really think about what happens in this book and very, very character focused. It is still that, and it's still her lovely writing and me and Leanna, we did this as a buddy read. We were just reflecting on, she just writes characters that really feel human. They have human flaws, they have human foibles and conflicts and desire. I mean, they just feel very lived in, and her villains are never, they're very hateable, but you get where they're coming from a lot of times, or like you get their motivation. And Kyle fucking Haven in this book, I hate him, but I really do get where he's coming from, especially by the end. So there's still a lot of really memorable characters in this one. I think the world, like seeing more of the world was interesting, seeing different kinds of magic worked really well for me in this. And I would say that if you are open to Robin Hobb, but you've been intimidated by what you've heard about the Farseer trilogy, maybe just jump in here with the Live Ship Traders, because I think this is closer to a more conventional fantasy novel or fantasy story. And if you like this trilogy, I've heard this trilogy is great, so I'm assuming I'm gonna like the whole thing. But based on this book, my guess would be if you like it, then maybe you'll have the tolerance to go back and like really dig in there with Robin, because like she is coming for your fucking emotions in that Farseer trilogy, and it is very slow and very character focused, and you only see Fitz's point of view. I think if that's something that's intimidating to you, possibly starting here and then going back to that might be a good move. Anyway, I really enjoyed this. I wouldn't say this was like my very favorite of the year, so I couldn't quite give it a 4.5, but I definitely think this is like a very high, strong 4-star book, and it's definitely my favorite Robin Hobb I've had so far. So I'm very excited to keep going in this trilogy. I think we're gonna read that in December, the Mad Ship. Another trilogy book, this time it was the finish of a trilogy, and that was Say Goodbye by Karen Rose. This was the wrap up to her Sacramento trilogy that had to do with like a cult and serial killers and lots of excitement. This was an incredibly, I could have put this as a surprise. I really enjoyed this book, and what I enjoyed about this book mostly was the romance. I liked the suspense story, and I liked seeing characters we'd already met, but this was a childhood friends to adult lovers story, and it was like angsting me in a way that I actually was super into. I don't think you can start with this book because I just think you won't get the impact of everything that's going on, and plot-wise I think you might be a little confused, but if you have been following along with this trilogy, it's not my favorite. It's definitely my second favorite of the three, but I just ended up really, really enjoying this one in a way that I didn't expect to. Like, I was expecting to enjoy it for the mystery bit, but this one is one that I really enjoyed the romance on. So if you're looking to like, I don't know, angst out because one of the friends has been in love with the other one forever and the other one has too, but they just missed each other, and just a lot of feelings and guilt over, I don't know. It was a lot, but in a great way. So that was definitely a hit. And then my top 2 books of the month. So first of all, The Villa by Nora Roberts was just definitely, hey, cat almost took down the curtain. Would have loved that. The Villa by Nora Roberts was definitely my favorite of her books that I read this month. This felt like Dynasty. It was so soapy. It had a mystery or like a suspense plot, and there were romances, but I would actually really just call this like an intergenerational family melodrama with those elements thrown in. It is very sudsy, and I just think it swept me away. And it was a different kind of standalone from her than I've really read before. I don't know. I really, really love this. Definitely my favorite from the Roberts readathon. It was my big hit. And I think it did drag a little bit in the middle, so I didn't feel like it was the full 5 stars, but it was really, really good. And then my other 4.5 star was The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. I have literally not seen anybody who's read this who hasn't really enjoyed it. It is definitely my favorite romance I've read so far this year. It was so enjoyable. First of all, it's so trope-tastic. It is a fake relationship. It is professor-student, but without the power dynamic bullshit, because basically our heroine is a PhD student, a biology PhD student, who is working, I think she's at Stanford, and she gets into a fake dating relationship with a professor who is like famous. Like he's a very well-renowned, respected biologist, one of the brightest of his generation kind of a thing, and he is not her professor, so they are in the same department, but he is not like overseeing her work in any way. So I think that helped not feel too icky on the power dynamic, but you did get a little bit of that like forbidden, like, ooh, teacher, student, professor, student thing. So you get that. He is a grump. He's a big old grump. Everybody's scared of him, and she's just like a complete ray of sunshine. They end up going on to like present at a conference, so like they end up sharing a hotel room, so it's not the same bed, but it is the same hotel room. That's great. Once we get to sexy times, they are spicy. So I felt like that was very effective. And just something about the quality of the writing I felt like was so excellent. Like I'm very excited to read more from this author. It had a lightness of touch and a readability that was special. I felt like it's a cut above what you typically get, I guess. I don't know. I loved this. This is, like I said, definitely my favorite romance of the year. Also, apparently it started its life as Rilo fanfiction. That tells you anything. I just absolutely love this. So I am so excited to read more. I will say that there is content warning for workplace sexual harassment, and I really like the way that unfolded, like that's sort of the conflict or the plot element or like the complication, and I really like the way that unfolded, and it felt like the resolution of that was far more satisfying than we normally get with that plot type, so that really worked for me. So that was my biggest hit of the month. And with that, I do want to give a couple of housekeeping and giveaway notice things. So first of all, I am running a giveaway right now because I just hit 30,000 subscribers. Thank you guys so much. I believe that will still be going through the day after when this video first posts. So go check out my Instagram if you want to participate in that. But thank you guys so much. The second thing is, I was originally supposed to be having surgery in August, so I was gonna take some time off because of that, but I'm not. I'm doing different things. It's a whole story. Anyway, I'm gonna be in a clinical trial, so I'm doing some prep for that, but I'd already planned to basically only have one video a week for the month of August, so you'll be getting a video on Sundays, but that's probably mostly what you'll get from me aside from podcasts, so I'm not fully, I'm so bad at taking time off. I won't fully take time off, but I'm gonna be mostly off for August. I kind of just need to take a step back. I wanna do some thinking about where I wanna go with the channel and like how, I don't know. I feel like I want to explore where I'm at, and I think I just need to take a little bit of a step back to sort of evaluate kind of how I want to continue to evolve my content in a way that still feels really creatively satisfying to me. Because I feel like I've been in a little bit of a rut creatively, or sort of like in terms of feeling fulfillment of being satisfied with my content. I don't know. I think I just need to take a step back and figure out how to feel a little bit more inspired again. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody who tunes in and enjoys, and I still enjoying interacting with you guys. I don't know. I think it's sometimes just good to like kind of do some reflection. So I took a week off for the surgery that now I get to just like read and think, and I'm gonna try to journal and I don't know, just sort of like check in with me. So all that to say, you will still be getting videos in August. They will just only be once a week. It'll be on Sundays. So I feel like that's still pretty solid. Okay, I think that's everything I needed to tell you. So that is how my reading went. That was the housekeeping I had. And I think that will do it for me. So let me know how your reading went in July. Let me know your hits or disappointments, etc. Let me know what you thought of any of the books I talked about. And yeah, so if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, and I think that will do it. I hope you're having an absolutely lovely day today, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye!